Some musicals entertain, some provoke, but the Book of Mormon musical does something unusual. It hands us, the audience, a mirror. And that mirror reflects belief and doubt and optimism and suffering, missionary zeal, and the very need for humans to find meaning. Behind the jokes and satire lies a serious question. Hello, my name is Matthew, and this is Hello Mormonism, Continuing Revelation. The Book of Mormon musical may not be for everyone. I promise you that this series will be PG, unlike the musical. So if you've seen the musical, well done. I've seen it 16 times. I'm sat here in my t-shirt of the musical, and the musical is meant to offend you. If you're okay with that, if you're okay with being offended, then go and see it. If you think of being offended is a sin, stick with this series, and we will explore together the themes of Mormonism and historic Christianity and their intersection, or not, as the case may be. And in doing so, I hope that we can discover more about the Latter-day faith, Latter-day Saint faith, and also a greater understanding of what it is they think they are trying to do. So this serious question is this, that it poses: what happens when a confident faith system meets a world that doesn't play by the theological script? Today, I'm not reviewing the show. We're using the show as a case study in belief, culture, storytelling, and the unexpected ways that religion travels and adapts and sometimes mutates. The musical opens with a cheerful prologue. And that prologue presents Joseph Smith's story in a simplified, almost fairy tale tone. It sets the stage for how the show treats sacred narrative as performance. The pageant style format mirrors real Mormon missionary teaching methods, which are, if you've had them knock on your door, they're visual and structured and confident. But it intentionally exaggerates them for humor. From the beginning, the audience is shown the central tension of the show, the gap between official religious history and how that history is received, interpreted, and adapted by others. The first song, we meet these fresh-faced Mormon missionaries. They rehearse their script like a spiritual sales pitch. It has big ideas of evangelism, which are choreographed and learnt behavior. It's full of confidence before reality maybe hits them in the field. It is in an idealistic training school. It's faith packaged for mass delivery, but clean-shaven and smartly dressed young men. The missionary work for a Mormon is a sacred calling. It's not just enthusiasm. Mormon missionaries believe their job is to share restored truth, is to proclaim a modern revelation, and that they are representing the only church with true priesthood authority. If you've ever met a Mormon, they are often optimistic and uniform. And as it is in this show, until we meet the overweight and scruffy Elder Cunningham. Next comes 2 by 2. The missionary companions are assigned to each other. Our two main characters come to the front after the others have all been assigned, and everyone else is being put together with great enthusiasm, and there's hugs and there's high fives. Elder Price dreams of spiritual stardom. He is our super Mormon. And Elder Cunningham, the scruffy guy, can barely remember scripture without adding sci-fi references. The true theology represented in this song are themes of obedience and worthiness, and then the confidence in one's divine calling. Cunningham represents what happens when belief outruns your understanding of your faith. In the end, reality hits, and they're not sent to Orlando as Price hopes, but to Uganda. Elder Price launches into a confident and completely self-obsessed anthem about how he is destined for spiritual greatness. He is the super Mormon with Elder Cunningham as his side plate and his sidekick, who is mostly in the background to support him. The song exposes a subtle tension in missionary culture, the belief that God has a specific, even heroic plan for me. Price doesn't just believe in the mission, he believes he is the main character in that mission. LDS teaching emphasizes personal calling and purpose, which can inspire humility and service, or, when exaggerated, like in this case, a kind of spiritual ego. This number sets up Price's journey. He expects a story where he is the heroic center, but reality forces him to learn that he is not. The song asks, gently and comically, what happens when faith becomes less about God's plan and more about my spotlight within the plan? Next, we completely change scene and we head to Uganda. The missionaries arrive tired in a village in Uganda. The villagers vent their despair immediately. This song has gone from the squeaky clean, tidy look of Mormonism without swearing to suddenly the reality of language and culture and experiences hit them. So this song is raw and angry and is like a theological whiplash to what we've previously seen. It's a huge culture shock for the missionaries, and it is full of swearing, unlike everything else we have just seen. And it asks this question to the audience: if God is real, why doesn't he, and why hasn't he fixed everything? This is the question of theodicy and the problem of pain in comedy song form. Price and Cunningham react with a panic, unsure what to do. Hasa Diga Eebowai is a rude, extremely rude phrase, but actually in reality means nothing, which is why I don't mind saying it. The LDS real response to this would really be something like an understanding that suffering is temporary, a belief that God has a plan even in that suffering, and that in terms of eternity, everything will be reframed for good. And also that old adage that trials develop faith. However, the villagers aren't interested in this cosmic patience. They want to be helped right now. Here's what happens next. Turn it off. The missionaries sing about repressing doubt, sexuality, trauma, and forbidden feelings. They just smile and suppress them. Turn it off like a light switch, they say. This is one of the great numbers and is another amazing contrast to what we've just seen. The optimism of the Mormons compared to the reality of life. But then we see that there is a gentleness and a conflict within the Mormons who may be struggling to turn these things off. This cultural pressure within Mormonism for perfection and positivity, and not just Mormonism, broader Christianity in general, is prevalent in this song. However, it's true to say, I've met lots of Mormons and missionaries. These people are real people who have feelings and struggles and weaknesses. And some of them actually openly acknowledge them. A Mormon is very open emotionally and happy to cry in front of you and become emotional and tearful. So maybe in reality that they're allowed, that they're encouraged to bring emotion in certain aspects, but not others. So repentance from sin is a core belief regarding spiritual growth within Mormonism. But culturally, the expectation is to be, it's all fine. It's all, I'm fine about this. And I think perhaps from a British perspective, we see that all too familiarly. That idea from a very English British perspective that we're to suppress our feelings and our emotions and have a stiff upper lip. Next, we head to the town center. No, we don't. Next, we have this little ditty as it's very short actually, as Cunningham and Price go to bed in their two little single beds, and they sing this "I am here for you," where they're here for each other, and it shows clearly that Price is ready tomorrow to go out and change the world with this huge number, all-American prophet, and yet Elder Cunningham literally knows nothing about Mormonism. They end up going to bed going, "I'm here for you, buddy," and they it's a very, very sweet sort of non-sexual love song from these two missionary boys. So this is All American Prophet, a musical history lesson about Joseph Smith and golden plates and angels and visions, presented like a children's cartoon meets Broadway revival. It's a wonderful snapshot through Mormonism and makes you wonder, why would they worry? Why would they be concerned about getting some correct Mormon theology into this show? And from a religious historian perspective, it makes it much easier for me to watch. But hey, I'm not their target audience, right? A guy in his late 40s who, although I perhaps should be their target audience because I've seen it 16 times. I once spoke to someone who had seen it over 50 times. But they've got this big, grand number where the Mormon doctrine is being presented to the Ugandans. And we have real LDS doctrine in it of Joseph Smith seeing God and Jesus, about how he translated this ancient scripture and how the authority of the priesthood was restored. And that authority continues. And then Elder Price becomes the guy who has had that passed down to him. And so Mormonism is seen by Mormons as a continuation of biblical Christianity and not a replacement of it. So what they would say is that what we see as mainstream Christianity today, as in the first vision, Joseph Smith was told that those denominations are an abomination and that God was going to restore those things that he had in the past and restore true Christianity in 1830 to, or 1820 when the vision was, but 1830 when the Book of Mormon is released. And this idea that this was going to restore true Christianity to the world. However, to outsiders, sacred history can sound really, really strange. Next comes this sort of satirical African pronunciation of Salt Lake City. Our main female character, Nabalungi, dreams of this Salt Lake City as heaven on earth. She's told in the end that it's not a real city, that it's a Messiah-shaped metaphor. But she wants this place, this real place where flies don't bite your eyeballs and warlords are friendly. This is messy in the show, I think, because Salt Lake City is a metaphor. However, in LDS beliefs, Zion is both a real location and a spiritual ideal, a community of peace and righteousness. Whereas the song only captures faith as an imaginative hope. When the initial Mormon settlers headed west, they were looking for this paradise. If you read any Mormon history, that you'll see that they were looking to set up this sort of paradise place on earth. And yet in the show, it's treated only as a metaphor. That's probably the thing I think is probably most unfair. And then we reach the end of Act 1, where Elder Cunningham decides to preach whatever works. He said, this is my time to man up. Jesus manned up, my time to man up. And because he doesn't know doctrine, he doesn't know LDS doctrine, he has to improvise his doctrine completely. However, we find in the second act, this becomes wildly effective. And I think it asks the sort of real theological question is, when does missionary contextualization become theological invention? You know, the mainstream church today, particularly the charismatic church, is always looking for new ways to communicate. And I just wonder if sometimes do we miss out on the truths of scripture and the gospel and the historic faith because we're just pushing endlessly for a new way to explore the gospel. So Cunningham accidentally proves a historic religious principle, I think, that religion can spread when it speaks the language of those who are wounded. If you watch any of my other videos, particularly on Victorian slum priest ritualism, you'll see that the gospel spreads, that their missions become more successful as they reach out to those wounded people. We're now going to we've reached the interval now, and what I want to do is I want to explain to you a little bit about me and what on earth I am doing as somebody who's probably, you know, quite conservative in outlook, but has fallen in love with the Book of Mormon musical. Now, my first interaction with the show was when I was with the family when the girls were tiny, and one of them was in a pushchair, and I walked past with Rachel and Beth and Esther this building, the Prince of Wales Theatre, and I think we were going from Fortnum and Mason to KFC because we could afford coffee and cake in Fortnum and Mason, but then had to have KFC for lunch. And what we did was I said, well, that's one show I'm never going to watch. And that ended up being a massive lie, because what happened next were Mormon missionaries within a few years had knocked on my door, and I became really fascinated with Mormonism. And the more I studied history as I hit my 40s, I found that I thought Mormon history was really interesting. The millenarian movement, the premillennial, early 19th century movements that grew up, particularly in America, and a few in the UK, were really, really interesting. And then I found that, you know, only within 7 years of its founding in 1837, missionaries were sent to England, to the north of England. And there's some absolutely incredible writings about those, some of which we will cover in this Hello Mormonism Continuing Revelation series. However, what I also do, I love theology and I love history, but I also love musicals. And this musical really, really makes me super excited. I could watch it every day. I listen to the soundtrack really, really often, but I've seen it 16 times and I've got 3 favorite actors. The first one is J. Michael Finley, who plays Elder Cunningham. When he joined the show in London, he had just finished recording the film I Can Only Imagine, where he played the main character about the Christian rock band, I suppose, and the singer of the band, Mercy Me. So he was my favorite. Elder Cunningham always added an extra thing. Now, I can't remember if he was the guy that did the cartwheel during Man Up, or if he's the guy that when it's the just like Bono, I Am Africa in the second act of the show, that he wears sunglasses. Both of those get good laughs. I also loved Leanne Robinson, who played Nabalungi in nearly every one of the shows that I've been to see. She is absolutely captivating. In Salt Lake City, when it's just her sat in the middle of a very simple stage, initially with a typewriter, but since lockdown, they've given her iPads and they've given the Ugandans a bit of an upgrade, which I think is actually better. They've changed some things of the show, which I think is worse. And they've changed some things to make it better. One of them is that, you know, it's not an old-fashioned clunky typewriter, but it's sort of iPads and all of that. She is absolutely brilliant. And I always say that Salt Lake City is very much the somewhere over the rainbow moment for her. And the audience is absolutely captivated and silenced as Leanne Robinson brilliantly as Nabalungi sung that song. Then there's Stephen Webb. Stephen Webb played Moroni, so he's in the prologue in one of the very, very early scenes, but he also plays Elder McKinley, which is if you know about the development of the show, that the Elder McKinley character was developed for the person that was playing it in development, and he's the one that leads the Turn It Off song, and he's the one that he has these suppressed feelings towards another man, and he just has to turn them off. He's absolutely excellent. I saw him. He's no longer in it. I think he's left relatively recently, because I think he was in the show from the beginning in London. However, one of the times I saw it more recently, he got ill during the performance and he cut short his line. The song ended, and this was in All American Prophet. The curtain came down and there was a pause. And I felt like the absolute geek of the show, because I was able to go, right, I can tell you what's happened there. This guy, I believe, has got ill. And he's had to run off because he did cut his line short and then ran off stage, and we never saw him again. And he should have arrived later on, but the music just carried on. Then there was like a 10-minute interval, and as is my want at that time, you go run to the loo, always take the opportunity. There's never enough toilets in these theaters. Always take the opportunity to run to the loo. And then when I got back, it was then announced that someone else was playing Elder McKinley, and that guy, he was brilliant. He was in the sort of chorus, I think, and he'd not played one of the main characters before. He played Elder McKinley. He should be really proud, because I can't remember his name, but it was really, really brilliant. And at the end, they all rallied round him for the bowing at the end, and were like, "Well done, you guy." So I love the Book of Mormon musical. As I told you, I've seen it 16 times. I also love theatre in general. This is my youngest, when we went to see the comedy about the bank robbery by Mischief Theatre, and they were brilliant. That was so funny. That's at the Criterion, which is just around the corner from the Prince of Wales. I've seen that one a couple of times. I've also seen, what else? There's me with my eldest at Wicked. I would say this: when you go to the Book of Mormon, it doesn't matter where you sit. Every seat in that theatre is brilliant. Maybe the sort of ones, the chairs that are on the sides aren't brilliant, but if you want the best value ticket in London, my advice is book nice and early. It's something like 8 or 13 weeks in advance, and go for the back row in the circle. You see it perfectly, and it actually, if we're talking about getting offended, it's one of the least offensive places to see it. I've sat right near the front. I've sat absolutely everywhere in this theatre, and that is by far the best value ticket, the back row of the circle. And it doesn't matter in the Prince of Wales Theatre where you sit, whether to the side or to the middle, because the sound throughout is brilliant. I would say, when I've seen Wicked, I've been 6 or 7 times to Wicked, I always try and get seats near the middle. That theatre is huge, by the way, and even from the back, it's still amazing. I always try and get them near the middle, because the sound quality around the sides just doesn't seem quite so good. Wicked, the musical, Defying Gravity, is probably the best moment I've seen in theatre live. It's absolutely incredible. It suddenly looks like the Wizard of Oz film. And although I love the Book of Mormon musical, Man Up is brilliant, but not quite as good as that. So I've seen loads of stuff, Young Frankenstein, and I've seen that twice. I've seen that done by amateurs and professionals. I love pantomime. I'm very British. I think pantomime's brilliant. And if you're American watching this, try and look up British pantomime. It's basically the same half a dozen gags in all these different fairy tale shows. That's I think that's at Twickenham Theatre there. When I was tiny, I found this photo earlier. That's me in the waistcoat and the white shirt. So when I was young, I must have done some acting. I believe well, you know, little tiny local stuff. I had 2 lines in this. This is a Cinderella parody where the ugly sister there, the shoe actually fits, and they have to marry the wrong person. I had 2 lines in it, and there I am. So that's me. That's probably the only acting you'll ever or the only photo of me acting you're ever likely to see. The Book of Mormon musical is touring the UK at the moment. A couple of weeks ago, or last week, my friend went and saw it in Bristol. She says it's not quite as good as in London. I've been with her to see it in London as well. And then the final show, this is my friend. She is called Jez. We won't tell you her first name or her middle name, but she is absolutely brilliant singer, local theatre in and around Somerset. She's directing a play, I think, coming up in the new year. But we've been to see the Book of Mormon together, and we thoroughly enjoyed that. Jez is one of my favorite people that God ever created. So the opening of the second act begins like this. We are back to a prologue where the Hill Cumorah type pageant begins again, and we see Jesus in this one. And then we move on to a song called Making Things Up Again. So in the interval, we all got ourselves. I tend to have a whiskey and Coke. So we've got that. We're back in our seats. The music has started again. And what happens in this song? So Elder Cunningham decides to sort of continue to teach these Mormons. And yes, he's still inventing doctrine. he reads some of the most controversial passages of the Book of Mormon. And actually, the Mormon missionaries often carry real Book of Mormon books with them in the show. The satirical punchline in this really is that people start believing him because his message, although not true, it sounds relevant. So this doctrine has been adopted from various contemporary sci-fi things and some form of Mormon belief, and the idea that the Ugandans are going through the problems that they're going through. So the idea is this, is that doctrine can continue to evolve, and actually that is a Mormon doctrine, right? It can be, we can have new revelation because they have a prophet at the head of the church, and we can have something new. We can have further revelation. There's revelations of polygamy that at one point Joseph Smith didn't like, God had not revealed according to Joseph Smith, and at other points he had. But really, Elder Cunningham is not in a authoritative position to make up doctrine as he goes along. So he can adapt it in tone, but he's basically rewriting it. And here belief becomes mixed with sci-fi. So whilst Cunningham is having a super cool time and everything's going great and things are on the up, Elder Price, the Super Mormon, is having a theological nightmare. So he's having this theological panic attack, which involves endless cups of coffee. It involves Hitler and murderers and dancing donuts and a guitar solo from Satan. What really happens in spooky Mormon Hell Dream is Price falls asleep. And he has this dream that he's been sent to hell. And all these bad people are there. The worst things he can think of: coffee and donuts and Hitler and Satan. And it's all very bad. The underlying LDS theology from this is really that the teaching that sin is taken very seriously, but that eternity, it doesn't quite fit with this, because there are degrees of glory within Mormonism. There is also this idea that God has mercy and that a person's job is to find our way back to him. Also, Mormonism is a story of redemption, not in a novelty musical sense, but redemption from that God-shaped hole and the torment of being empty that they might think we are. However, the fear of hell is very real for Mormons. Not many people go to hell in Mormon theology. However, backslidden Mormons are in for a big, big surprise. Then we hit Cunningham wakes up from his dream with a new resolve, and we hit what is the best song by, the most critically acclaimed song in the show. And he sings this sincere declaration of faith, which is literal about where God lives. It's confidence, his Super Mormon confidence is back, and it's uncompromising. And there's a lot of lines where the intersection with historic Christianity and Mormonism is shown clearly. And then there's a lot of lines towards the end of each verse that kind of show that Mormonism itself is distinct. It's the only song in the whole show, I think, that treats Mormon belief with a genuine sincerity, even though it still stretches it slightly and exaggerates it. But it asks this question, and that is really, or it makes this observation, that faith often requires committing before understanding fully. And when we come to look at Mormonism through a slower walk through each of these songs, looking at how it interacts with Mormon theology, I think we will see that right at the beginning, that there is an expectation within Mormonism that you take it as read, you take Joseph Smith as a true prophet, and then you have to start believing what he said, and what he said is then sort of unveiled to you. So Price takes belief as a heroic act. And the Mormon missionaries at this point are pretty much separated, which again, we will look at that and how that wouldn't really happen when we get to the show. So Super Mormon has had his dream, and he goes off and he wakes up with a new resolve. Elder Cunningham decides to make up Mormonism to make it relevant, or make up LDS theology because he doesn't know it, to make it relevant to the Ugandans. And he's having some success. And then comes this song, Baptize Me, which is a comedic romanticism of baptism. It's pretty awkward, it's very sweet, and I suppose it's technically sacramental. However, baptism isn't symbolic in Mormonism. It's an essential audience believed to wash away sin, begin the new covenant life. If you start to show an interest in Mormonism, one of the first things they want you to do is to get baptized. And in order to baptize someone, it requires the priesthood authority of someone to do it. So the musical here plays with the solemn act of baptism, but gives it these boy-girl connotations, which are pretty awkward and fairly funny. Then comes I Am Africa. This, if you've listened to only the soundtrack, this is much shorter in the soundtrack because we get a pretty good summary of the play, where we're at this point, what's happened when Elder Cunningham, Elder Price is taken, I believe, to the warlord. The outcome of that is unhelpful for him. But then the Africans themselves have embraced Mormonism, similar to how it's been presented by Elder Cunningham. And then all of a sudden, the very, very white boys, they are Africa, just like Bono. And it's very, very funny, but very short on the CD or on Spotify and YouTube Music, and very much longer, and explains a lot about what's been happening in the show. But I want you to go and see it. I'm trying not to tell you everything. I'm trying to tell you the things that you can find out by listening just to the thing. Oh no, my slides have gone terrible. We might have to do something about that, because what we then have is the Joseph Smith American Moses pageant. So much like the pageants that we've seen at the beginning of Act 2 and Act 1, the converts have learnt their theology from Cunningham, and they present their own version of Mormonism. And because the conversion and baptism rate is so good, the mission president comes and visits to watch it. The show is confident, but it's utterly unrecognizable to the mission president, who's visiting because of the great success of that Ugandan mission. The missionaries panic and are told they are not Latter-day Saints. They're told you're about as far away from Latter-day Saints as they can be. What then happens is the Mormon missionaries kind of rebel and go, we're going to stay here and help these people. And in the end, everyone embraces this hybrid faith, which is sort of part Mormon, part Ugandan, part Cunningham sci-fi. And perhaps the show reveals that religion survives in this context, or certainly according to the writers, not because it's academically precise, but because it gives people a story and a structure and a hope. And then we end up with a secret surprise at the end, which I won't tell you. I wouldn't let my girls listen to the hello reprise at the end until they'd seen the show. I remember taking Esther when she was, I think she might have been 15, and she doesn't look as old as 15. And people were really, really worried about that I might not understand what show I brought her to. And actually Esther's response was brilliant. She went, well, actually, I've seen it before. That was the second time I took her to see it. So let's just think. This musical isn't asking at any point, is Mormon doctrine true? It's not even asking, is Mormon doctrine similar to historic Christianity? That's what we're going to ask. That's what I'm going to ask in these podcasts. What are the similarities and the differences of Mormon theology and historic Christian theology? And I'm going to ask these things by picking Mormon theology and learning Mormon theology from themselves, and not from anti-Mormon literature. But the show is asking this: why do people believe and what happens when belief collides with reality and suffering and imagination. The truth is, some religions remain fixed in sort of propositional, historic, unchanging truth, and others evolve. The presidency and the prophet idea within Mormonism allows these people to evolve. But I think probably it's fairer to say that most do a bit of both. Even historic Christianity, there's been some changes in recent years. So the next episode, episode 2, is going to be a deeper dive into hello and looking at what happens when the missionaries knock on our actual door. I would encourage you in the meantime, try and locate a Book of Mormon or open it online and have a read of it and see what you think. And when we reach episode 2 of Hello Mormonism, we will be doing that together, where we will look at Moroni chapter 9 in our Book of Mormon. We mustn't be scared to use their documents, whether they're true or not. So here we are. Here is the end of episode 1. Thank you for staying with us. I've been Matthew, and I will remain being Matthew even after this video finishes. And this is Hello Mormonism, Continuing Revelation.